Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. As usual, we do thank you for tuning in and watching our programs, and we do encourage you to follow us on social media, Page Turners Plus on Facebook and YouTube. Today, we'll be reviewing What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You by Sharma Taylor. It is her debut novel, which will be released on July 7th, 2022. And to tell you a bit more about Sharma Taylor and the novel, we have Kesua.
Sharma Taylor is an award winning short story writer and a novelist who hails from Jamaica. Her debut novel, What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You, just came out this week. The story follows Jamaican housemaid Dinah, who at 18 years old gave away her baby son to the rich and childless American couple she worked for before they left Jamaica. They never returned, and she never forgot him. 18 years later, a young man comes from the US to Kingston. From the moment she sees him, Dinah never doubts this is her son. And this encounter sets off a chain of events that ripple with love and violence, shaking their lives and their lives in the community around them, making everyone question what they know and where they belong. A powerful story of belonging, identity, and inheritance set in 1980s Jamaica. What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You brings together a blazing chorus of voices to evoke Jamaica's ghetto, dance halls, criminal underworld, and corrupt politics, at the beating heart of which is a mother's unshakable love for her son. It's not just about the ghetto, though. With this novel, Sharma Taylor paints a world of extremes of poverty and wealth, where people jostle against each other for space, power, and they all claim to be acting in Jamaica's best interests while doing awful things to other Jamaicans. What a Mother's Love is a gripping page turner. We look forward to talking about it with you.
Thank you very much, Kesua. So, to get the ball rolling, really, the novel begins with a historical note and what is called a wise ruling from Solomon. How important are these to the novel itself? Eric?
Thank you, RJ, and good day to everyone watching us. We thank you for your viewership. Yes, the beginning of the novel, Sharma Taylor rehearses the story of Solomon and the two women with the babies, and with one baby dying, uh, and the other mother takes the living baby, and there's a whole controversy about that. We those of us Christians or Jews, whatever, would know the story. But yeah, it does set up, I think, the entire tension in the novel itself. A struggle almost almost to the death, um, between two women and one son. So I found it interesting that she set it up that way, with this familiar Bible story that will take us through the heart of the novel.
And then I suppose also in terms of the historical note where she sort of sets the background for the development of garrison communities in Jamaica, and then we find out that the whole story takes place in a garrison community, Lazarus Gardens. So is this portrayal of garrison communities realistic, and does she sufficiently establish the link between garrison communities and crime? This is thrown out to anyone, but I see Paul is smiling.
I cannot say whether the portrayal of a garrison community is realistic. I've never lived in a garrison community. It looks like it looks like what I've read about. Um, but as the novel, the point one of the points the novel makes is how separate Jamaican communities are. It's a highly stratified society in terms of class. So I was born middle class Jamaican. I would have no clue what life is like in a garrison community. I don't think I know it much better than the rest of you, to be honest. I know where to find them physically, and the legal district happens to be surrounded by garrison communities. So I have that kind of knowledge, but I certainly don't have, like I said, I don't think in real terms, I know much more than you do.
But then I assume Sharma Taylor probably wrote the novel knowing that 99% of her readers wouldn't exactly know what happens in a garrison community, and that it would be based on what we've read or seen on the television. heard from other people. So I guess it is sort of difficult to establish what life is really like in a garrison community outside of what we've read.
I did wonder about that though. One of the things I found hard to comprehend was, for example, the Dinah, who is one of the protagonists. She's one of the mothers in this story. She's when she welcomes Apollo, the son, she lavishes food on him. Now, this is a woman who has just lost a job. She is working 2 days a week as a housekeeper. And she never seems to have any difficulty. She never seems to have any worry about food security. That was, for me, a disconnect. I would imagine that if you live in a garrison community, you are underemployed, seriously underemployed. I don't know how she was finding money to create these lavish feasts for Apollo. Granted, it was poor people's food, but it seemed the descriptions, it was a lot of food. So that was a disconnect for me.
Is that perhaps, if I can just jump in there, is that perhaps an incoherence in the story? Because if we think about another character, Regina, she talks about hunger being a part of life. And that doesn't seem to be the case for Dinah. Is it because of where she works? Does she have access to food, or she has access to cash to buy food? Is there something about the ages of the different characters that mean that while Regina has hunger as a real driving force for a lot of her activity, that isn't the case for Dinah? Is it because she's connected to the church? I don't know. I'm posing the questions.
I guess you could fill in the blanks that way.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. I guess we're meant to fill in the blanks there to figure out how Dinah was able to live comfortably enough in a garrison community. Granted, of course, I suppose not everyone in a garrison community would be indigent. Eric,
That's a good point. And I think while reading the text, I think my mind did go there. But Dinah, middle aged, maybe, I don't know. It was hard to tell how old she was or how old she is in the novel. Maybe in her early 40s. I don't know, because she still had dudes checking her out. But she also had a mother there. I mean, I don't know the system about food and here in the United States, you got an EBT card, and you can go and get food. You got food stamps and that sort of thing for folk who are living under the poverty line or at the poverty line. But I know my grandmother. My grandmother had government assistance when I was a kid, and grandma always had food in the house. Plus my auntie worked. So I didn't. It wasn't so much of a stretch for me. And I think going back to the point about these garrison communities, number one, it made me think about Kai Miller's Augusttown. In fact, Augusttown is actually mentioned in this novel. That's number one. So, like others, we've had a literary reference to these garrison communities. And second of all, being from a housing project myself, even though I didn't grow up in the housing project, I was a little baby in the housing project and a little boy. But those garrison communities reminded me of the housing projects in here in the United States, which where I grew up were totally African American communities, and very little policing, and basically the projects police themselves.
I wanted to mention though that Gina actually mentioned, you spoke about government assistance, and Gina addressed that. Gina said when she spoke with Apollo, and I think it was Apollo who told her about poverty, what poverty looks like in the United States, even though he was wealthy himself. She said, what I gathered from what Apollo told me is that poor in the United States is not the same as poor in Jamaica, because you certainly cannot go to the supermarket and get a trolley full of food. So yeah, but then I guess if we could speculate further and say, all right, it's a garrison community, maybe the Dons provide food, or access to food, because actually that is one of the things. Like I said, I read just like you. I don't know personally, but that's one of the things that I've read, that the Dons will provide you with the basic necessities of life. So that I guess could be one of the solutions.
That's actually one of the questions that I had, because the Don in this case, when speaking with, I think, the police commissioner, assistant commissioner, said something about, he looks after his people. And just based on the descriptions of the way that his people were living, it seemed like there was a real disconnect for me. He's claiming that he looks after the people in the community, but yet we can see that they were really, really, poor. And so to me, that was a real disconnect. And I definitely don't think there was anything like government assistance, certainly not back in the 80s.
I was actually really surprised in that context where he describes himself as looking after the community, the way that I don't know what the right word is, but what he does to 13-year-old girls. That there's a sense that he owns the women in the community. I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And it just seems like such a legacy of enslavement, right? It just feels like what kind of freedom is that? Where like you don't have any kind of bodily autonomy, so much so that you run off to some older man for safety and well keeping. Like it was a real picture of deprivation that really shocked me, actually. Yeah.
That I don't find shocking, because quite frankly, that is something I have seen, and not just in Jamaica. I've seen that here too. So yeah, it happens.
And speaking of deprivation, especially in Lazarus Gardens and so on, do we get the impression that with Dinah and Gina being relatively poor, being poor, that Apollo has some moral obligation to give them money? As we learn throughout the novel, he starts giving them money and taking care of his people in the garrison community. So, do we think that there's a moral obligation on his part to take care of these people?
That's a tough question because uh, I think more obligation in this particular context has to do with relationship. This brother didn't have no relationship with nobody until he pops up there, and Dinah makes this revelation that causes all of the row and the trouble. I felt that part of the story. Ah, how can I describe it? It was a bit unsettling for me. I thought he should have. I thought the author should have made him a little bit more conscientious about what he was getting into and what he was saying, because what that sort of posturing comes off as paternalist in my mind. I don't know what everybody else thinks about this, but I felt that this young man just graduated from high school. He's a black man, but raised with a white father, stepfather, black mother, um, all this wealth and privilege, that he's coming to Jamaica with his hood on. It's his superhero, what we would call today white savior hood, except he's black. So I felt like he's pressing too hard here.
I know that we're all nodding away, but I'm going to jump in and say I felt similarly uncomfortable with that, because I think it turned what should have been a natural relationship between young people into something quite transactional, and it spoke much more about their relationship with power and money in that community than it did about real human connection. Because, like you said, he was clearly a little bit lost and looking for something in them, so it wasn't a completely it's not like there was no exchange happening. It was a very strange kind of thing. I also didn't find that normal or healthy, perhaps is probably a better word.
Yeah, I agree, because I thought that initially especially when Apollo and Damien met and they had a connection and they were hanging out, I thought that was pretty cool, right? The way that they connected and they were hanging out, two teenage boys talking about music and that kind of stuff. and then it kind of morphed into this transactional relationship, as you said, Kasua. And I thought that was probably that was quite odd.
Just to add before you get in here, Paula, I think it was the second time that he met Dinah, and this happened in Lazarus Gardens. I'm not trying to give away too much. I remember there was a part where he, stuffed cash into her hands without her even asking. She didn't ask for that or anything. He just decided, "Oh, I'm going to stuff U.S. dollars into her hands," which I found really strange because, I mean, I guess going into a garrison community, you could see that there's deprivation, there's poverty, etc. But this is an 18-year-old boy coming from the United States who must be a bit naive, ignorant even. So I don't know why he decided that it would be completely fine for him to just push cash into her hands just like that. That was a bit strange. Yeah, it set up a complex immediately that was, yeah, unsavory.
Dinah refused the money at that time, but then later Dinah suggests that he has some kind of moral obligation to help Regina. So I think all of this, to be honest, is coming from a place of middle class guilt, and it's also coming from a place of Judeo-Christian teachings about what people who are more are more privileged owe the rest of the community. I honestly think that is where it comes from. I think it comes from the author. That's how I read it.
That would make sense as to why it doesn't feel natural in the novel then, because it does feel like it kind of happens and it changes things that would like it changes relationships in a way that don't feel organic. So thanks, Paula. Actually, that makes a bit of sense.
Yeah, I really struggled with Apollo as a character in the entirety of the text, and I gave him a lot of grace. I gave him a lot of grace, and I felt that there was some admirable things that he thought of, that he thought through some things. I felt at times he was quite courageous, but I think what Rajay just mentioned, his naivete was something that was glaring, and there were some blind spots and ignorance. And again, I didn't want to judge him from my 21st century position. I didn't want to judge him from my own intellectual thinking about Caribbean life from an African American perspective. I try not to do that, but still, he came off to me as a do-gooder without the capital, the social capital to do it.
Eric,
Yeah,
can you say a bit more?
absolutely.
Like, what do you mean by that? Or maybe Francine, you got it. So explain
No,
what you
well, I
mean.
don't know if I'm going to explain what Eric meant, but I do agree to some extent, because when you think of the fact, some of the restaurant that he was taking her to, right? If you understood the social dynamics, you wouldn't do that. So yeah, he was, but again, he was young, right? He just graduated high school. He'd lived a fairly sheltered life, so he's I'm guessing he's never had to think any of these things through, right? You like a you like a girl, you want to take her out. Yeah, you go take her to a fancy restaurant. That's what he's used to doing. And he didn't actually think that, maybe I should not actually continue what I'm used to doing, because he was just unaware and naive.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in Apollo's defense, because somebody has to speak up for this young man. He's like been brought up black in a white of white spaces. His family are, and let's give Apollo some space. His mum is the only black woman I've ever heard of ever described in this way. She's a black woman who marries a white man, disappoints her black family and is cut off from them, or seems to exile herself, and with her white husband decides to travel through Africa and the Caribbean. So what's going on here with this character, and how is she going to produce a black young man who is comfortable in his own skin? She clearly doesn't. You know, Apollo's reaching when he gets to Jamaica to find some kind of sense of who he is among black people. Fails, succeeds, fails, succeeds. And so I think Apollo reminds me of a lot of young people that I've met, or older actually black people I've met, who've grown up around white people and are very uncomfortable in their own skin as a result of it. I don't think I've really met black people either adopted by white people or just grew up around white people who aren't damaged in some way from it. And I think Apollo is very well drawn in that way. I think I recognize that character.
But Kesawa, you mentioned that this that Celeste travels around Africa and the Caribbean with her husband. I think you're making a leap there, because the novel certainly blurs the lines between who was traveling around Africa and the Caribbean. I don't know that we can be so certain that it was Celeste traveling around the Africa and the Caribbean with her white husband. In fact, my take on it is that it was not Celeste who was traveling around Africa and the Caribbean with her white husband.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Paula. And in my view, that was not Celeste either.
What? I need more information. Okay, so no.
Well, we have to be careful how we talk about it, because we don't want to spoil it for other readers.
Okay.
In fact, that was one of the things I liked best about the novel, that it blurred the lines, that you weren't quite sure who was doing what. And I don't want to spoil that for other readers. Let them read it and see for themselves.
I had the same thought myself, so yeah, I ain't saying nothing.
Did we all read this book differently? But I think that's a real strength of the novel, right? That there are layers to it. I asked the question: is anybody a reliable narrator in the story? Because you think this happened, and then it seems like it didn't quite happen like that, and then this happened, but actually someone else tells a slightly different version of that story, and it's wonderful storytelling in that sense. I have to say.
Yeah, that's and I agree. And I mean, when I finished reading it, I put in my notes lots of unanswered questions. And I think that's it. These different narrators, these voices, people remember what they remember. People remember what they want to remember. We all do this. We all tell different versions of of a story. 2 or 3 people could be sitting around the same time and the story's happening. I see it this way. Somebody else sees it that way. Another person sees it this way. I think that's natural for us, and I think that's what she's doing, what she's done in this novel. So yeah, it leaves a lot of frayed edges, we might say.
And it's natural that we would see that, because we all see things from our perspectives, and we all bring our histories to how we view things. I mean, because we've had a little bit of banter before we started filming, I can see that all of us read this novel from our own backgrounds, you know, and that's how we view life. We all think that our reality is everybody else's reality, but it isn't. It's just our reality. You know? And I like the fact that the novel plays on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we necessarily don't think other people don't have a different version of reality, but I take your point.
And this takes us to the time where we take a bit of Dinah's perspective on reality, and we'll have a reading by Sharma Taylor.
Hello, my name is Sharma Taylor, and I'm the author of What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You. And I'm super excited to be doing a reading for Page Turner's Plus today. So this book is set in 1980s Jamaica and centers on a housemaid by the name of Dinah. And in this scene I'm going to read, Dinah is about to meet a boy who is going to change her life. The setup is 18 years before. She's given up her baby boy in an informal adoption to her employers, who are an expat American couple living in Jamaica at the time. So I'll just go into it. Dinah, you're making a mess. Mrs. Brown's voice, bring me back to right now and the black car parking. What's gotten into you today? Me hear the people coming in, but me not paying them no mind, since me nowhere near finish all the things the Browns want me to cook. Is where the time gone? Mrs. Brown leave the kitchen, carrying the jug of what to eat your apple juice with it make. She told me to follow her into the living room with a tray of glasses. Ray, great to see you again. I see Mr. Brown hugging a fat white man with brown hair like bird feathers. Celeste will be right inside. She left her glasses in the car. This must be Apollo. Mr. Brown in his element now, vigorously pumping an outstretched black hand. A tall, nutmeg-colored young man in grey jeans, blue t-shirt, and black and white sneakers walking. Him have thin, neat locks, light brown at the ends, tied up in a ponytail. We see the long eyelashes, the nose that take up almost half his face, the full mouth, the neck. I look at his wide shoulders. I let go the tray, right there on the terrazzo tiles. Time fall away and gone. I don't care about the shock on the Browns' faces or about anyone else in the room. I say to the boy, son, are you? Is really you? Sorry, him say. Him is a boy in the body of a man, broad face, knobby head like Leroy own. Mr. Steele, I say to Mr. Steele, who looking at me now like him don't know me. Dad, the boy look at Mr. Steele too. Mr. Steele is the color of uncooked shrimp. What's she talking about? Mr. Steele, the same Mr. Steele with the floral shirts and crisp white pants, talking now. Sorry, lady, but you're confusing me with someone else. We don't know you. It's me, Mr. Steele, Dinah. Dinah, shut up, Mr. Brown said. Shame fill up his face. I don't care what him think. Mr. Steele, you don't remember me? She hasn't been herself today, says Mrs. Brown. In my head, I scream, don't offer no excuse to me, you son of a bitch. You're not aiding and abetting you to have criminal teeth and pick me again. I know my child, that's son. My voice sounds strange, but I'm not underwater anymore. The drum exploding in my ears now. I grab Apollo's hands, stepping on glass that looked like points of light glistening on the floor. His fingers like mama's, fingers that use sticks on drums to release spirits in the dark. Mr. Steele is barking now at Mr. Brown. Christopher, who is this woman? If you don't stop this madness right now, Dinah, I'm calling the police, Mrs. Brown screamed. But I pull my son to me and rub him head. His hair still coarse, but no longer picky like when he was a baby. I like the sweet smell of his fuzzy hair. I kiss his mouth, the mouth that is like my mouth. He is a part of me that is outside myself. That's it, Mr. Brown shouts. He and Mr. Steele's hands are on me now, fingers digging into the floor, trying to pry me off song, but me too strong for them. The pandemonium brings Mrs. Steele from the car outside. She run in, her nostrils flaring like a bull about to buck. Take your hands off my son, she yelled and slammed her body into mine, knocking over the coffee table. Me on the ground before me realized what happening. She pinned me to the floor. Then her husband dragged her off me, kicking and screaming. Dinah, get out. Mrs. Brown is in hysterics, and I hear Mr. Brown, pitiful sounding, saying, sorry about this, Ray. Him warn me now. Dinah, if you put one foot inside this yard again, I'll have you locked up for assault. Mr. Steele's white face blood red. Son still standing there, body quiet like him feet in cement. I'm sorry, he says again. What's going on? No more sorries. You're here now, my son. I can't believe it's you, I say. With eye lock, I see me in him. Him embarrassed, I trying to take him back in the open. All right, I'll be patient, my son, I say under my breath. But I know him hear me. Only he can hear. The phone in the hall start to ring, adding to the madness. I'm sure that neighbors hear the screams. Mr. Brown still throwing expletives like stones when we gather my bag and leave. I don't care what him say. Not about Mr. Steele's fake amnesia or about Mrs. Steele acting like she not Mrs. Steele. Now that her skin looks some shades darker. I need my child. I need my son, and I can't wait to get home to tell Mama me find him.
Welcome back. That was a reading by the author herself, Sharma Taylor. So just to sort of continue on from where we were before we took the read-in, I guess I could ask the panel, were any of the characters lovable in the story? Did you become attached to any of the characters? I see head shaking.
I mean, I would say I did become attached to Apollo because I wanted to see this story played out. I mean, he was caught in a really, really, really tough situation, a couple of tough situations, and I wanted to see how he was going to handle himself and how he's going to handle it, the situation. So I was invested in him. I would also say that I was invested in Damien as well. Again, complex character. I think he's more complex than Apollo. It would have been interesting. It's a story centered on him, but obviously. Um, but yeah, I was invested in Damien. I wanted to see him. I wanted to see him flourish. I wanted to see him flourish.
Yeah, I liked Apollo too, and because she's a young woman, Gina, I was very anxious for Gina. Um, I liked Dinah as well, you know. I thought I had some problems with how Dinah was portrayed. I thought Dinah was too without sin. Um, I don't know that any of us is as forgiving and as well. I guess she wasn't all that forgiving, but I found that Dinah was a little bit too good to be true. But I did feel compassion for Dinah.
I don't think I loved any of the characters, but I definitely was on Team Dinah the whole way through until I was like, hold on, am I? Is she? What's going on? But I still liked her all the way through. I will say. Um, what I will say also is Regina. I think Paula, you said it exactly right. Anxious for her, like you want this young woman, to make it out, even though she seems a little bit cold-blooded at points. But you understand really that it's one of these characters where poverty has kind of misshapen your kind of ability to connect with people. And so it's interesting and quite lovely actually the difference that Apollo makes to her life. Um, I don't know though that I really loved any of the characters. Damien is a character I probably had the most affection for. And it actually reminds me a lot of Tone in Sherry Jones's novel. Like he brought really similar feelings and quite a similar story in some ways. I mean, not the two novels, but the two characters have quite similar in some way. Certainly where they end up as well, unfortunately. Um, yeah, but I don't think it's good that I liked him because he reminded me of Tone, who I absolutely adored. But I did, so here you are.
I felt the whole book reminded me of Sherry Jones's book.
Yeah, I definitely got vibes of how the one armed sister sweeps her house. I also didn't really love any of the characters. I definitely wanted Apollo to make it out, so to speak. Like, yeah, I was kind of anxious about what was going to happen, especially given the plan that was made for him by British. So yeah, and also because I felt like he was caught up in all of this through really no fault of his own, and coupled with, as we said, his complete naivety. Like, I felt like he really deserved to make it out, so I definitely wanted him to survive, so to speak. But honestly, I didn't have a lot of empathy for any of the other characters, not even Damien.
Yeah, I think I could almost fully adopt Kesua's positions on the characters, especially with Regina. I think she was just a victim of her environment, and not revealing too much. But some of the actions she took, especially towards the end of the novel, I think is just a symptom of the life she's lived, the community she's grown up in, even her family, as we find out in the novel as well. So she gets this mentality where a mentality of exploitation. That's all I'll say. And I mean, it's bad, but I don't think we could necessarily fault her for having it because she's just a victim of her environment, and especially the way she was treated by her family and was basically turned into an adult as a child. So I think that in on its own could be forgiven on my I could be forgiven on of that. In terms of Eddie, though, I haven't heard any mention of Eddie, but I liked Eddie the character. I mean, I found that he deserved an entire chapter, probably two. I needed a bit of backstory on Eddie. I just the way he handled certain things throughout the story. I feel like he deserved a chapter or two.
Eddie,
Kessel,
the
you seem
taxi driver.
yes,
I
Eddie
was
the
like,
taxi
for a
driver.
minute, I was like, "Who's Eddie?" Then I was like, "Oh, Eddie."
And that's the whole point. The fact that you were like, "Oh, who's Eddie?" I feel like he deserved a chapter.
Eddie was always showing up at the right time. Eddie was the eyes and the ears. Eddie knew
Listen,
everything going on.
I didn't need to know anything more about Eddie. Eddie was there to earn his money driving his taxi, and that is what Eddie did. End of story.
I mean, I liked Eddie. Eddie was just minding his business, making his money, and whatever happened.
I mean, Eddie was a snitch, right? Let's be clear. I mean, not a police snitch, but like Eddie was the center of the drama as well in some ways, right? Lots of things don't happen if Eddie doesn't open his mouth, right? And so it's really interesting, like you point out. I was like, "Who's Eddie?" And I was like, "Oh, yes." And I
You
think he does
said
that
the
quite
word
well.
transactional earlier, Kesawa. No, Mr. Eddie is all about the transaction.
Another character we haven't talked about, actually, I would love to hear people's thoughts on the characters of Davis and British, because and Sims, right? Sorry, more characters, so many characters, but like British was a real oddball for me. Like so he's supposed to be a sociopath. I get that, but then he's also quite thinking and clearly does feel quite deep because he has this sense of inferiority that he's always trying to overcome. So how is he unfeeling? Yet constantly feels like he's in a battle of power with various people of the upper classes. I found that really weird. And also to keep the lower classes that he acts in their best interest, but also ensures that have no kind of autonomy in the spaces that he controls. So he was a real character. Davis's actions at the end really surprised me. I'm sure they surprised you, but I'd love to hear if anybody else is surprised. And Sims, Siaga, what do we think?
I feel without those three, there wouldn't be a story. Those three individuals, while they might not necessarily be the protagonist or take up a huge chunk of the book, without Davis, British, and Sims, there would be no "What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You." Um, yeah,
Yeah, they were the ones with power. They were the three characters with the most power in the novel, even more than Raymond. I mean, Raymond, yes, he had some power just because of who he was, but in terms of having an effect on the lives of the people in Lazarus Gardens, it was those three who were wielding the power. Really interesting. I was quite surprised at what happened in the end with Davis. Wasn't sure whether to be like what or be like yeah you go, but it was surprising.
Sims is Siaga. I think Sims is just inspired by Siaga. I don't think he was, for example, he wasn't as much Siaga as Intiasar in This One Sky Day. This One Sky Day, there was no doubt in my mind that was Siaga. Sims is just kind of remotely inspired by Siaga. That was how I read it.
Yeah, the character British, British was intriguing. Uh, the whole thing about him going to to England, and then the racism that he experienced, obviously, made him somewhat a little bit a character worthy of empathy. And the brother talked about it, and then he spent some time in jail there. Um, yeah, that was interesting the way that Sharma Taylor layered him, because he's got the experience of racism that we've all experienced. He goes to the white man's country. Um, at least I some of us have that experience, uh, being around the white man and the systems of whiteness. Uh, and he survived. He goes back, and then he finds his place in Lazarus Gardens. Basically, he's the next one coming up, and had to do some unsavory things to become the top dog. So there's a lot of like crime drama involved in his story. I mean, again, he could have been his own story. Could have been his own story. Reminds me of some of these novels written by former judges, these crime dramas like Carlito's Way and all that kind of stuff. But Yeah, he's interesting dude. Supercilious, clean freak. Oh my goodness. Also
I
kind of remind me a little bit of New Jack City too.
Mm. I think one of the things I found odd about the novel actually is the timing of it, because British is a deep. I'm not spoiling it when I say he's a deportee, right? So on the one hand, it springs like, oh yeah, I've heard about deportations, Windrush, la la la. But it's like, but he's too early. He must be one of the first people to be deported, um, like because that's very it's a much later kind of phenomena politically than this novel, and I think that was the disjunction I struggled with a little bit. Like, why is he? Because he's been deported and has become a crime boss, right? But it's like it's just too early for me. But that's my historian going. That doesn't make sense with the time.
No,
So just
you're
ignore
not the
me.
only one. I felt the same thing about the timing and the period. I was like, is this the '90s? Oh, it's got to be the '80s. And so yeah, well, we're two historians, so I feel you.
I guess we could also jump a bit to speaking a bit about Mama the character and what that represents and how motherhood is treated in this story. So I'll throw that out to the panel. What do you think of that?
Mama is a seer. That's how I take her. Mama is almost a prophet, and she's this wise woman, and that is how I see her. That Kessewa is why I do not believe Celeste was in Africa, because I trust Mama's take on what is going on. What is real is what Mama says is real. That yep, that's it.
I wasn't too sure actually about the role that Mama was playing. I honestly, that was one of the things. Like every time her section came up, I'm like, I don't get it. Like why I don't understand. But now that you said that, Paula, it's true that she said she was very clear from the very beginning. She was like, nope, this is not it, you know? And I was like, all right, I think I should go with what Mama is saying.
Mm,
Yeah, I
yeah,
also read Mama like the chorus in a Shakespeare play. Like he tells
yeah,
the story. She's the
yeah.
reliable narrator and the only reliable narrator. And ironically, we don't understand that like the way the other characters understand who she is, but we
Mm,
understand that as the reader.
But Sharma plays with our heads too with Mama, because remember that Mama has some mental health issues. So Sharma suggesting to us, really, should you trust her so much? But I do. Um,
yeah, I trust Mama as well. I mean, Mama was firm in some of her in her assertions about the past and even the present. And yeah, that the whole thread, we think, oh, Mama's on her last leg. Mama could go at any time. Mama, goes on an escapade, and we don't know where she is. And yeah, they will say, okay, well, no, we can't trust nothing this old lady got to say. But um, no, for me, I trust Mama, and I think that ties into the other question about her motherhood, because she a mama too. She a mama too. Is this not about Celeste and Dinah and their pitch battle? But also Mama plays into that too.
What I also found witty was that Celeste was referring to her mother as Mama. Or am I the only person who picked that up? Or I thought that to be at first I found
Yeah,
it confusing. I was
I
like,
noticed that. Hmm.
yeah, but then I realized that it might have been a very intentional thing for Celeste to be calling her mother
It
Mama as
better
well.
be intentional, because that's what African Americans call their mamas. It's our mama. We don't say mom, mummy. It's mama. Your mama. All them jokes, your mama. This.
but in the Caribbean, we call our mothers mommy, though.
That's because
And
they're
that,
British. That's a British thing.
yeah,
Yes,
it's a
it's the
British
British
thing.
thing.
It's
Well,
a British
actually,
thing.
my grandmother was always mama to my mum's generation, right? So their mother is, I guess, mum or mummy.
Yeah,
No, that
The
you say it.
grandmother.
That's true.
yeah.
That's true.
My
Yeah.
grandmother, my mother's mom. Everybody called her Mama. But from my generation, all the kids called their mothers Mummy.
So
Mm.
when did the change happen in the 60s?
Probably had to do with
Yeah.
with education, right? Because
Well,
like my parents and their aunts and my aunts and uncles would have been the first generation of my family that went beyond primary school. So it's probably because of
yeah.
that. They went to secondary school, they read British literature where everybody calls their children mummy, and so we're calling them mummy. I'm thinking, I'm just, riffing here, but that might be it.
Yeah, it might be. It might be. Yeah.
So, I mean, as we're starting to come wind down to the end of the program, I guess I could ask a sort of overarching question. What are your thoughts on how forgiveness is addressed in the novel, if it is addressed at all?
I thought it was there definitely. Um, there's there's a space given for forgiveness. There's a lot of forgiveness that has to be done because of all of the things that are happening in with the relationships. And I I felt it. I definitely felt it, and I thought it was appropriate. Again, I go back to my statement with Apollo and social capital. Um, Not saying that we have rights to hold people to things, and being a lack having lack of forgiveness, but uh, I don't know. That was a big weight for some of the characters. Apollo, that was a big weight for him to carry. Um, Raymond, that was a big weight for him to carry as well because he's involved in having to be a forgiving person. Um, yeah, it's there, and I think I go back to Paula's point. I think the author is plugging her own values, which is just fine. The author can do that. I mean, those values, I share those same values, but I think I would have liked it to be a little bit more nuanced.
I'd agree with that. I feel like forgiveness is so important in this particular story. And I felt like it was actually handled relatively superficially. Forgiveness is so powerful when you really forgive the kind of terrible things that need to be forgiven. Like, it changes people. It's not a small thing. And I thought actually it comes across as a small thing in this novel. It's a simple look of sorry here, I forgive you here, and it's done. And it's like, that's not real forgiveness for me. But
Yeah, I think I agree. I feel like, I don't know, the not just the forgiveness, but a lot of the way that the relationships developed between the characters just happened so quickly and so easily without any sort of development, And yeah, I mean, but there were some things related to forgiveness that I think were not so hard. I think a lot of the characters in the book had to forgive their mothers, and I'm not sure that that happened, right? Because Damien, he I don't think he never understood or forgave her. Regina as well. There's a lot of things happening with the characters and their mothers where I feel like they hadn't gotten to the point of forgiveness. But for the specific incidents in the novel, yeah, I feel like it all happened a bit too sweet, too easily, and wrapped up a bit too neatly for my liking.
Dinah forgiving Mama for the way Mama raised her. I thought that was way too easy. She should have had a much more complex relationship with Mama. Um, so yeah, that didn't work for me. I thought a lot more should have happened.
But then I saw two instances of non-traditional forgiveness or tradition or forgiveness in the non-traditional sense. The first one for me would be what I would call Apollo forgiven Dinah, or I don't want to spoil anything, but Apollo in the sense that he's portrayed in the novel in Dinah's perspective. Let me put it that way. Forgives Dinah because here you have Dinah, essentially giving away her baby, and there seems to be a sense of, well, that's okay, that's water under the bridge in terms of her relationship with Apollo. That's all I'll say. I'll try not to give any spoilers. The second instance for me is Apollo forgiving uh, Regina at the start of their interaction when they first met, because here's Apollo growing up in a privileged family, going to a private school, and not seeing the world as it really is, and then he essentially falls in love with Regina. to me, he forgave all the things that are bad about her. He forgave, that she does what she does. Whatever. I'm not trying to spoil the thing again, but the things that she does in the Garrison community, to me, he forgives those, and he's like, I still love you. That's all I'll say. So I think there are two instances of forgiveness in the novel. I hope
I
I didn't
think
provide too
there's
many
no,
spoilers.
I think there's more because I think there's a beautiful bit of forgiveness between Damien and Regina. And that I think is really well done. And I think I'm thinking back to some of the things we've said in this conversation. I have to say, I wonder if we've treated, and perhaps it's the way the novel's written. It's not a YA novel, but it deals with very young people, and I think there has to be leniency and space for them to kind of not to be naive and to not be fully fledged in some ways because they're still developing as people, right? That's why young people are interested in as characters, because I think the way that they grow, Regina and Damien, is really well done, and also the relationship with Apollo towards the end when they all kind of come full circle. That's really lovely, and I think it's very well done actually.
All right, that's why I said in my reading I had to give Apollo a lot of grace. I couldn't judge him as a 53-year-old African American historian man.
Well, I guess I could also just ask for any final thoughts on the novel, the characters. Well, just one very brief thought. I don't know, Kesua.
I really liked the novel. It was very poignant. It was very vivid. It really painted a picture of a world that is not that familiar to me. And the way the characters intersect is really, really well done. I really enjoyed it.
Well, we don't have time for ratings, but what I will say is that we're not finished with this book because we do have a scheduled interview with the author. And just as a reminder, this is a debut novel that will be released or was released on the 7th of July, 2022. And so you could get a copy to read it and understand all that we've been talking about. So the next time you're seeing us, you'll be seeing us interviewing Sharma Taylor herself. Thank you once again for tuning in to another episode of Page Turners Plus, and do have a lovely day.